I would like to start by just introducing you all to the Candidate Experience Awards. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, but for those of you who are not, the Candidate Experience Awards are really the source of all the information we're presenting today. Their purpose is to recognize and reward excellence. They are run by the Talent Board, a not-for-profit organization. And last year in 2015, there were 200 companies that participated and 130,000 candidates responded to a survey. That's just amazing breadth in terms of level, stage of the recruiting process, generational, gender. It's a big enough survey that you can really draw some amazing results from it. And the analysis of this survey is ongoing. The Candies will recognize the top 50 companies that apply for Candidate Experience Award. If you apply and don't win, you are never called out for not being one of the 50 best, but the whole purpose of the Talent Board is to recognize people who are doing a good job, who also happen to be building their own brand and really elevating the profession by treating candidates with respect and dignity. The Candidate Experience Awards is a two-phase process. The first one is that companies fill out a questionnaire describing their practices and their results. The second phase is that surveys are sent out anonymously to candidates who engaged with the process. Some of them just applied, some of them went through an interview, some were hired, some were not hired, and there are rules around the mix of hired versus not hired so the data doesn't get stacked, but it's all anonymous. But as a Candy applicant, you get all of your own data back, so it's an amazing piece of benchmark data. And best of all, it is free for all participating companies. The awards will be going out this year for 2016 during an awards gala that's being held in Austin, Texas as part of the Recruiting Trends Conference. For any of you who haven't registered, I'd encourage you to do that. There will be a track of just Candy winners who will talk about their best practices. It's a great way to get information about all of that. With that as background, I think we've got most of the people logged in. Let me move on. I am thrilled to introduce Gerry Crispin, who many of you know. Gerry is co-founder of Career Crossroads, a consortium of leading company and talent acquisition executives. He is also a founding board member of the Talent Board. Gerry, Elaine Orler, and Ed Newman are really the three individuals of whom the Candy Awards are, it's their brainchild and an important addition to the industry. And Gerry is really one of the most respected people in the industry. He is a model industry guru. He knows this business inside and out and is a constant student of new practices, new emerging trends. Gerry is as up to date on talent acquisition as anybody you can find. So if you have the privilege of engaging with Gerry, guarantee you will find something worthwhile and new in that discussion.
Can we change bullet to student?
Yes, I know that's something that you are proud of. You're always learning. You're an industry student.
There we go.
I am Maureen Hannigan. I'm CEO of Spark. I'm the moderator today, and I am also a proud member of the Candy Council. And this webinar is sponsored by Spark. Spark is a multimedia candidate attraction tool. We engage candidates with video, increase your exposure with social media, leverage all the capabilities that mobile gives you, all the amazing power that's sitting in everyone's hands to really get your jobs in front of candidates. Spark has won major awards. The ones we're most proud of are the HR Tech Product of the Year, the Mobile Recruitment, and just recently the Tectonic Awards. Now, before I turn this over to Gerry, I'd like to just explain the methodology of how we got the information that we're sharing with you today. The 130,000 individuals who responded to the Candy questionnaire had one question which read, was there anything you wished you knew about the job before you applied that would have helped your decision to go forward? And this was an open-ended question. It was not a forced choice. It was not a multiple choice. It was a text box where individuals could type in whatever they wanted. 47,000 people typed something into that box. Of that 27,000, we were able to machine code, and that means the information was simple enough and straightforward enough that if someone said, I wish I knew how much travel was required for the job, That was a simple enough statement that we could code it to recognize that phrase and code it as, wanting information about travel. However, there were 16,429 that were not that simple. And each one of those was read by a human and hand-coded for the intent of the response. So if someone said, I wish I'd known I had to travel to headquarters to interview with my supervisor, that really wasn't about travel, that was about the interview process. So those were read individually and hand-coded. The 5,000 that were missing were people who simply wrote in the word no or there was nothing. So that's the basis of the data. There are tens of thousands of individuals who said, yes, there's more information I wanted that would have been valuable to me when I started this process that would have helped the experience. So that's what we're about to present to you today. And with that, let me hand this over to Gerry.
And what I love about this, by the way, folks, is that in having a conversation about candidate experience, it's a continuing conversation. The truth of the matter is we're looking at this from a whole variety of different directions. Those of you that participated in the past year have a lot of data, and this is kind of an encouragement to kind of look a little bit deeper. The idea of looking at some of the text responses is not an easy issue. It's not that simple to be able to go in there and do something to see if it supports some of the other data and responses from your candidates. So this is a powerful way of looking at it, and it turns out there were essentially about 3 different areas, 3 buzz killers that correlated with the lowest percentage of Candy winners, and so reflect, I think, some of the key issues that we know exist out there and are coming up in some of the other areas. From the data so far, there were 5 critical buckets, if you will, that we've seen significant correlations. So setting expectations and demonstrating listening skills, holding recruiters accountable, perception of fairness, and the extent to which we're driving listening. And so the question is, are some of these showing up in this kind of data? And the answer is they are. And so we're seeing it from this perspective. We find 3 critical areas that companies ought to be taking a look at, because the bottom line is if you do not take care of these areas, you will be rated lower. It's just as simple as that. And we're beginning to be able to measure how much lower by how poorly you do. And the first has to do with those listening skills, not being able to hear back. That when more and more people are researching companies a little bit more than they have in the past, the percentage of the amount of time spent doing that is going up. And the reality is that when a person starts to become more serious about their career and their next job, they have questions they want to ask you. And so your ability to respond to them, for them to get a question to you, and then for you to be able to get it back so that they hear that you are actually listening, is a very key issue. So it's not just listening, it's the perception on the part of the candidate that you are listening. And when they send you something, you need to be able to respond. And your technology and ability to do that can be in question. Obviously, there's a lot of application issues in terms of how I find information that is useful for me of making decisions. The length of the survey, for example, and some of the UI issues are increasingly giving the message to candidates that you've not really understood how to get their information in. And it affects everything from their perception of you from an expectation point of view, as well as their perception of fairness. So we know, for example, that, and this is just one thing, we know, for example, that there's still a normal distribution of how long it takes to apply that ranges from, obviously, a few seconds and a couple minutes to as much as an hour to 2 hours. Now, the normal distribution is between about 15 minutes and 60 minutes. But at the same time, from other data, We know that most people are increasingly going to apply from a mobile device, and when they have a mobile device, they are less likely to stay and continue that or complete the application after about 15 minutes. So the 80% of the companies out there are requiring people to spend 15 minutes to an hour to complete an application, and we know that abandonment rates are increasing exponentially at the 15-minute point. There's a disconnect here that we need to be able to deal with, and it's now being reflected in how you're being rated. And the last, this perceived discrimination, it's really broader than this. It's a perception of fairness about your entire process. There are so many things that go on within a recruitment process that sometimes give the message, and it may not be a message you intended to send, but a message that I'm not going to be able, I'm not being fairly evaluated, selected, given my opportunity to share why I think I'm competitive, any number of things that are going on there, as well as unconscious bias that's being perceived by the candidate themselves, by the way in which we're describing our jobs, by the way in which we're asking our questions, by the way in which we're interviewing, and by the way in which we're letting them know about our decisions. So these three things have to be really addressed and measured from a candidate perspective to determine that you're changing them. Otherwise, you're not going to change the way in which you're rated. So that's a key issue. You have control of this. Biggest impact for improvement, you could set all three of them up. So these should not be surprises, but the point is this is coming to support the data that was coming from other directions in the Candidate Experience Awards, as well as other surveys that we've seen. And so this just adds on the importance of having clear and detailed job descriptions. And job descriptions that effectively use the communication modes, all the communication modes that you can possibly think of to be able to supply that. I think eventually we're going to see job descriptions that are recast, if you will, from those internal pieces into something that's pretty much multimedia and certainly satisfies folks. But it's also not just the description of the job that I want to know certainly what I'm in for if you do hire me, but I also want to know the hiring process. It's the expectations about every aspect of the hiring process that if you do not set them for me, then I, as the candidate, am bringing the ones that are embedded in my head. And I have to tell you, they are usually not the ones that fit the framework of what you have. A typical candidate who has not spent a lot of time trying to look for jobs has this crazed idea that you might actually call them in a week. Well, there is probably somebody you're going to call in a week, but there's also about 99 people you're not. So it seems to me that we have a clear need to set those expectations correctly, and not simply give short shrift by saying, "Hey, if we like you, we'll be in touch." That just is it's unprofessional and certainly is not satisfactory any longer. It will impact how you're rated, and your ratings will impact the attitude and behavior of the candidates in terms of whether they'll apply, refer others, or even buy your products in the future. And so the time of the hiring process, I think, is also something that, again, this goes back to some of the expectations, but people cannot understand how in a time of high technology and all the stuff that they don't know about your process not integrating well with all those tools that you're playing with, why it takes so long to at least get to a point where you say, let's go forward or not.
Gerry, can I jump in for just a minute here? And just going back to the steps of the hiring process, that's one that can be so easily solved by doing something as simple as at the bottom of your job description, just stating, the steps for hiring will include, if you are selected, a phone screen, a written assessment, a personal interview, and just let people know the steps. So many people don't understand that, especially if they don't know there's an assessment coming. That seems to throw them for a loop.
I agree, but the operational definition of how you do that is going to differ for even within a company for the type of job. So that may not be true for an executive level. It may not be true for how hiring is done for hourly employees. Some specific areas that are very critical to a company, like technology, might involve some kind of hacker rank stuff or some other kind of assessment. It may involve a panel. So I can go on and on. We could spend 30 minutes talking about the differences between hiring processes, even within corporations. And I got to tell you, companies need to be able to say to this specific candidate, if you're looking at this kind of job, these are the steps, and these are some of the probabilities of how many people get through those steps. So there's an expectation of how well I'm going to compete based upon what I'm bringing to the party. And we've never done this before, but now we're able to measure that the companies that do this not only do a better job in hiring quality candidates through that final step, but the friction of their recruiting process in the future is lowered because those candidates that aren't even being hired by you are going out and championing to other folks who have the qualifications that they should apply to this company because they're going to get treated well.
Yep. And that's why I suggested you do those things in the job description, because they become specific to each individual job. But there are other things you can do. We're just watching the time. We'll move on.
I can quickly mention a couple of these. The hiring manager and the hiring manager's team, what could you tell the candidates more about that individual hiring manager? I want to know it's not an idiot that you're trying to set me up to come into. So help me understand that the hiring manager is, in fact, somebody who cares about my development, is engaging with me, will help me through that onboarding process, has a great team that cares about him or her. We need to supply more information about that. Salary is one of the #1 things that people want to know about before they even apply. And in our culture, very few companies still say something about what that is. At best, it says something silly like, we pay market or something like that. We can do a lot better, and that could be an hour discussion in and of itself. Culture, obviously you need to define some of the values, some of the things that really make a difference in terms of what you're doing as a company. I think companies have been doing a better job of that. But from a UI point of view, you want to make sure that it's easy for the candidates to be able to see that in relation to the job that they're in. Benefits, drilling down, again, that's more of a sophistication in terms of the content being consumable in forms and pieces that people can get to, as well as the company information. But you're seeing more demand on the part of candidates for key pieces of information before they even are willing to apply.
Okay.
Bottom line, we talk about these things in an ongoing way, transparent, authentic, responsive. But I will tell you, those can be cliches too. And you have to translate that to specific things that you can see, that you can describe, stories that you can tell, and measurement that you can have that this is coming across from the candidate. We tend to make the decision ourselves that this is transparent. But I have to tell you, it's not our decision to make. It's the perception of the candidate that it's transparent, not us. So if we're not measuring our processes, the journey that the candidate makes from beginning to end, from researching the company through onboarding, if we're not doing some sentiment analysis at each touch point we're missing an extraordinary opportunity not only to avoid the cost of losing incredible people that you've spent money to drive that far, but you are losing the reward that you would get if you were able to do this well. And the corporations who are rated high by candidates are measuring real value to their corporation's bottom line now. So you can obviously tell that I'm passionate about this subject, have been for many years. But to be honest with you, I'm optimistic now because we now have data that we can use to help drive very specific activities, buckets of activities that companies can use to individually execute their candidate experience in a way that's going to add value to their company. That's the difference between companies, is not what the candidate experience is, but how they execute in order to have that.
Great. Let me, before we open this up to questions, because we have just a few minutes left, I will shamelessly, if anyone is not familiar with Spark, Spark makes a lot of these things a lot easier. Sparks include videos of hiring managers and coworkers. These are informal videos shot on cell phones that add a lot of credibility to your whole presentation of your opportunity. Includes things like high-level benefit information, company synopsis, travel and work. Very easy way to really transform how you engage candidates, how you inform them about your job, how you get in front of them. So if any of you are not familiar with Spark, please reach out to me. I would be delighted to show you how this can help you immediately improve so many of these things in the very front end of your candidate attraction and candidate experience. With that, we're going to open it up for questions. You have a question box on your screen. Please feel free to type in any questions. But let me start with one for Gerry, which is Gerry's favorite question, I know. Is there anything we didn't talk about? Is there anything that you think would be really helpful to the participants in terms of the very upfront giving candidates information they want to start everything off on the right foot?
Well, I think absorbing and consuming the data that comes out of how you are looking at your candidates, I think, is the most extraordinary thing. And what I've seen several companies begin doing is mapping. I mean, spending time with their people or their consultants or whatever to map out the kind of touch points that exist across the whole experience of recruiting, from researching to onboarding, identifying some of the sentiment and points that you could do a sentiment analysis to be able to see the impact it's having, and then looking at, underneath that, looking at some of the tools and technologies that you've integrated within your system that you hope would have an impact on the stakeholders, from the recruiter to the hiring manager to the candidate, and then being able to perhaps experiment with one or two as a pilot and be able to then, again, do that sentiment analysis and see what the delta is. We are seeing, for example, and I'll give you one example of one specific thing, is I know the effort that Capital One, for example, made to get their recruiters to, as the last question asked, ask what didn't we ask you about your skills, knowledge, and experience that you think is important to share with us now and helps to make you more competitive for this job. That kind of question at the end of the application, at the end of the phone screen, at the end of the interview, or even the interview day, adds value to the perception of the candidate, many candidates that you don't hire, that you have a fair process, that you're interested in not just what you want to know about them, but what they think is important for you to know about them. And it does, in fact, change, in terms of what Capital One did, to look at that from an A/B testing point of view. It actually changed the way those candidates rated them from a positive point of view. And Capital One, along with 8 other of the Candidate Experience Awards winners, are the group of companies that have the highest NPS candidate NPS score that we've ever recorded. So you want to take a look at what people are doing and its impact on obviously the measurement.
Great. Well, to be honest, we have a couple of other questions here, but we are at the half past the hour and do want to keep to our commitment to keep this short, so we will make an attempt to reach back out to individual people with answers. But Gerry, thank you, as always. Really wonderful, enlightening. Appreciate this, and thank you all for participating today. And if you need more information, we will have these slides available and a recording of the session available that will be made available to you within the next 24 hours. So thank you, and with that, we will close it and hope to see you at the Candidate Experience Gala in November. Thank you.